Welcome into the Bobby Carpenter Show, and fresh off the Buckeye cruise last week, raising a ton of money for the James Cancer Hospital, doing a little bit with NIL, a lot of things going on. My man Joshua Perry is going to be with us once again. Anthony Schlegel's roaming somewhere around southeastern America between Florida and Georgia, getting off the cruise, going to baseball games, so he's not going to be a part of it. But it doesn't matter anyway, because we got so much to talk about. NFL Combine, what's going on where Josh is residing in the city of Chicago with our guy Justin Fields. Buckeyes may be playing at a new venue for them, but one of the oldest venues in American history. We'll have our tailgate talk with questions from listeners. So much here, so much going on. But probably, Joshua, we're going to start with this because we'll get into a lot of Buckeye Cruise talk because you are a longtime veteran cruiser, but this year took the year off given that you are going to be a soon-to-be father. College football CFP, they put together a committee as they always do. They're releasing the new model. They talk about the 5+7 model. It was approved, but maybe not approved for long. There could even be expansion with that. But this 5+7 model, Joshua, as you understand it, what does that ultimately mean, and how are these spots going to be divvied up?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting model. I'm personally not a fan of a college football playoff model that has auto bids. I'd like to have just at-large spots, and you rank them 1 through 12 for the upcoming playoff and figure out who the best teams are. But in this model, you've got the top 5 conference champs that'll get in. So the 5 highest-ranked conference champs likely to be, Big Ten, SEC, ACC, Big 12. That 5th one is up in the air. Certainly, the Pac-2, I'm not exactly sure, is a legitimate conference. So it's probably going to end up going to one of the old group of 5 schools there. And then you get 7 teams that can get in. I'll explain the reason why I don't like this right now is you can go back to last year and the way that the final ranking shaped up. And you'd have Michigan in with a bye, but Oregon being in or Washington, being in the Big Ten this upcoming season, they would have to be in at-large, even though they're one of the best teams in the country. You would have had an Arizona out of the Big 12 would have likely been the team that would have gotten in. They were number 14 team in the final rankings before the postseason started. It feels like we're going to end up giving buys to teams that don't necessarily deserve them based off of how good they actually are. I don't think the top 4 ranked conference champs are going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 in the final rankings. And so you could leave out a team who probably through their body of work earned the right to get a little extra time off for a team that got it just because they won a conference championship game. It is what it is at this point. I think the expanded field is going to be fun because we're going to get more games that matter toward the end of the year. Yep. But I feel like there are a lot of flaws to it. And quite frankly, they're not even committed to doing this because they're already talking about what they're going to do a couple years from now.
Yeah, that's what's interesting. Now you get a little taste of that TV money and they realize what it could look like. Say, hey, we're going to double us up from 4 teams to 12. We could sprinkle a little bit more in there. Could we get another couple $100 million or so for these extra games? I get it. I understand it. I'm with you. I like the fact that you should have a team representative from all, the 4 power conferences, and then the 5th at large, what they could potentially do. It seems like maybe lambs to the slaughter, but I think maybe 1 year, every handful of years, there could be a competitive game. But the 4 buys, I'm with you in agreement with that because, like you said, it's going to be so heavily loaded. But it felt like, Joshua, this had to be a concession from the Big Ten and the SEC, given the fact that there's no limit to conferences and the teams that they can get in. So you start talking about a 12-team conference, you're going to have your 5 autos. You'd think probably of the other 7, you're going to probably have another 2 or 3 from the Big Ten or SEC at least. And so you start thinking Notre Dame's in there.
Right.
ACC's probably getting pinched, Florida State, Clemson, maybe in any given year. You start looking to the Big 12, like could you have a TCU and maybe like a Baylor or someone like that, maybe kind of slide through. But it's going to be tough, I think, for any of those other conferences to get a second team in when you start looking at the metrics.
I think that's exactly how this ended up the way that it did. No doubt they wanted to make sure that each conference could be represented. The at-large spots are certainly going to be squeezed. And part of it is the size of the Big Ten and SEC too. It's not just necessarily, how many good teams are in there, but they're bigger conferences.
Yeah.
And so, it feels like they would have a better chance of getting more teams in that scenario. But I also think that's how we got to the idea that's being tossed around to 14 teams is, Sankey and Petiti were sitting back saying, okay, we've made our concessions for these next couple of years, but based off of the strength of our conferences and the size of our conferences, I think there should be more teams. I think we should have more cracks at it because we're going to have enough teams that are good enough by the end of the year to compete. So I'm totally here for the idea of making sure that the right teams can get in. I'm just not exactly sure that this model ensures that, and I'm not exactly sure that going to 14 is the right answer for that either.
Yeah, it feels like this thing was probably always destined to get to 16 at some point. They just want
Yeah.
to, ease you in, with a little turbo glide. Joshua, make sure that everybody feels good about this and slowly kind of creep it in on you. We're going to let you be exposed to a little bit of the idea first. Then once everybody's on board, all of a sudden it's like, all right, now 14, you know what, if we're going to get a 14, you know what, like 16 is just it's such a better number for everybody. Forget the buys. Because here's the one thing, if you're a 1 seed, you're a top 4, that's obviously very desirable.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's kind of like the NFL where you lose the gate, you lose the ability to maybe play at home as
Right.
well. So like there are some monetary concessions to having that week off.
Yeah, no, I mean, the whole thing is interesting. I think they got to get that figured out too. I think that the top 4 seeds would deserve an opportunity to play at least one home game before they go to neutral sites. So it's something that, they got to continue to have conversations about. And to your point, like who says 14, 16? Could it be 24 one of these days? Like, we don't know exactly where this is going to get. Last thing I'll say too, and this is not to rain on the group of 5 teams, because we saw UCF that certainly felt like they would have been a good enough team in a college football playoff era to try to make a run. And we saw what happened with Cincinnati getting in there, and they deserve to be in the year that they got in to the 4-team playoff. But I'm looking at the landscape from this last year. You had Liberty sitting there at 23, and they were the group of 5 representative in the New Year's Six bowl game. And I don't know if anybody remembers that because it was an awful game, but Oregon kicked them right in the teeth from start to finish. And it's like, do we really want that in the college football playoff? It's a question I would ask because we're saying that they would get one dedicated spot.
Here's the problem with that too. I think in the past, the things you were talking about, you saw this year with Liberty was different. I watched Tulane beat USC. You watched Cincinnati play really tough. I mean, there's been some teams that have looked really good, but also that was under the previous rules where the transfer portal didn't exist. Like those schools now will have an infinitely harder time retaining. Let's say they do get some great talent, their ability to retain it is going to be greatly constricted with obviously their ability to jump and NIL and everything else. So if that's going to be the case, like they need to put some firmer handles on what's going on and figuring that out. And lastly here, does Notre Dame have a gripe about this?
No, they don't, because they have chosen independence consistently over joining a conference, and this is one of the prices you have to pay. And I think they fully understood this going in. They had conversations dating back to like 2021 about what the new world would look like for them, and I think that they are perfectly okay saying that they have to play an extra game, but that extra game secures their independence.
It does. All right, well, coming up, we got some NFL Combine talk. The Buckeyes well represented, maybe not as represented as they have been in the past, but you know what? That's what happens. You get a lot of the guys coming back. Who can make the biggest moves? How will these guys look there? Joshua and I will break it all down next here on the Bobby Carpenter Show. All right, back into the Bobby Carpenter Show, and a little bit of transition where college football meets the NFL. That's one of the most popular non-contest, non-game sporting events, probably the most popular in the entire country, and that's the NFL Combine. There are no games being played. There's just dudes running around in their underwear and getting measured and heighted and everything else. But there's going to be 321 prospects that will be in Indianapolis. Buckeyes, I believe, have 8. We have Mayan Williams, Marvin Harrison, Cade Stover, Matt Jones, Michael Hall, Steele Chambers, Tommy Eichenberg, and Josh Proctor. Now, a lot of the guys that get drafted or go invited to the combine get drafted. There are some that don't. They've expanded it, the draft, because there's more compensatory picks. They keep adding stuff in, so there's more guys that get drafted. But do you hear this, Joshua, that there any memories that you have of the draft and kind of how it went?
Yeah, I'll start off with the medical evaluations there. You go as soon as you get off of the plane, they take you over to the hospital, check you out, make sure you're all good. And then there's a day where they take you into the different rooms and the doctors are all, tugging on your arms and legs to make sure that you're
Talking about
fine.
everything.
Yeah, and if you had an injury, they're trying to aggravate it, which really bothered me. But I actually went to the hospital. I had an abnormal scan on one of my knees, and so I had to stay there all night. And it ended up being a whole bunch of nothing, but that's how they like to waste your time. Second most memorable part, Bobby, is the drug test where they wake you up at 4 a.m. and you get the taste of what it's like to be a professional who has to give a sample. And they take you into the restroom, and there's a stranger that you don't know, and he's like, hey, shirt off, drop your shorts below your knees, and I'm going to watch you give this sample here. And it's like, this is not how we used to do it. And they're like, oh, don't you worry, because in the off season, we're going to come to your home and we're going to do the same thing to you. Those are probably the two things that stand out. The rest of it's a blur. It's a busy week. It's stressful, a lot going on there, certainly, but a great opportunity.
A lot of speed dating. I'll talk about that with the coach. You go in the room and you like 15 minutes, you come back out. There's a dude waiting for you, take you to another room, or maybe they're 20 minutes, and it's like boom. Some teams throw up like good plays of yours. Other
Mm-hmm.
teams you'll go in there and they'll have the film loaded. And Josh, I don't know if you ever had this, like you look and you know exactly what play it is. Like, yeah,
Yep.
this isn't going to be a good one. And they're like, explain what's happening here. Is either like you're missing a tackle, getting blocked to the ground, maybe drop a pit, who knows what it is. But a lot of us just want to see kind of how you handle that adversity because, as you know, the NFL, it's a very stressful environment. The game is high stakes. And the best part about that drug testing, Joshua, you must not have figured out. I would always have him meet me at the Woody because I'm like, I'm
No,
not
you
having
told
a
me
dude.
this. My
Yeah.
rookie year, you gave me that advice. You were like, when they call you during the off season, tell them to meet you at the Woody because there's nothing more demoralizing than having a grown man come into your home and watch you urinate.
Well, it's like, you look at your house, like everybody has that like half bath, like in the main
Mm-hmm.
area. Half baths aren't really designed for two people, but do you want to like welcome him into your master bedroom through master bath through the bedroom? Like, we're gonna walk around the house. I tell people the best part about the doing the drug test. I mean, they get I think they get retired umpires because those dudes get down. I mean, they're like,
Yeah.
why, like looking, like, bro, you're literally like 2 feet from my junk. What do you think I'm gonna do right now? Like, what's
The
gonna
crazy
happen?
thing about it too is how did you pick this career? Why
Yeah,
is this your job? This is what you do all day long.
the meat master, dude. I mean,
Oh
just
my
figuring out
goodness.
what you're gonna do. Like, who knows? But that's it's the most awkward thing. So they've got that obviously the combine. People always ask like why everyone's times were so much slower at the combine. And you mentioned it's like, hey, your knee's been bad. And I think they got it. It's a little bit better now. And they do kind of pods of teams where it's like, hey, we'll take, you know, 8 teams or 6 teams and have one doctor, like their team of doctors kind of all look at you together, as opposed to you getting 32 knee tests as they just hammer on that thing. And like, well, does your knee hurt? I'm like, what didn't when I came in here, but now it does because no sound human would ever have an evaluation like this take place. Like it's not good for you. Um, but as we kind of look at this and we see what's going on, is there any player that I was talking about you think could maybe really help separate themselves and maybe not even in the physical sense, but going through these meetings and being able to talk and showing their acumen, their intelligence, or maybe just their general leadership?
Yeah, I think there are two guys that really stand out. Number one is Cade Stover, and we know what type of leader he is. He was super solid too. It felt like anytime Ohio State needed a play, he was a guy that they could go to. I don't think anybody looks at him and is like, this is some elite athlete playing tight end, but he did a little bit of everything. And I think that his intelligence, his leadership is going to be something that teams like. I've spoken to him on numerous occasions, super no nonsense guy. Like he'll look you dead in the eye and you'll be like, I'm not exactly sure if there's a soul in there, but for a football player, that's a great quality to have. And I think teams are certainly going to like that. Michael Hall Jr. is another one of those guys too, where I
Yeah.
think what he can show off in terms of his athletic ability, and he did it at the Senior Bowl. I think he's going to continue to rise, and people are going to look at his size for playing the interior of the defensive line, probably ask some questions. The dude is a menace. He's super explosive. He's strong as hell. You cannot block him. And I think people are going to see that. It's going to show up. And they're going to also like what he looks like when he goes through the big bags for the pass rushing drills too. getting a guy who can rush from the interior of the offensive line is something that a lot of people are looking for, and I think he's got those skills.
He has some scheme versatility, like you said. I mean, he could probably play, 5 tech. He plays some
Yep.
three, play some shade. You can move him around. The big thing I think for Mike Hall too is the fact that he's been injured, and so
Yep.
going there, like, this is a chance for him to kind of answer some of those questions. Teams dig in, and some teams will say, "Hey, red flag, we don't want you." Other teams will look and say, "Hey, these injuries, while serious in the normal landscape of human life, they're not really that impactful as your ability to play football." So I like that. I like those two guys. I think Cade is probably a little bit bigger and faster than people think. Like, you watch him run, he kind of looks lumbering, but he always kind of gets separation because he's got such a long stride. And so I think people will be impressed with him. Joshua Proctor, I think, will test really well
Yeah, he will.
because he's a talented athlete, a 5-star guy. I mean, heck, he almost played with you. He's been in school so long,
Yeah.
but I'm gonna be really impressed with what he does, or curious rather, because I've watched his maturation process.
Yep.
Joshua, when he got to Ohio State, he had a lot of like kind of Dame Arnett in him,
Yeah. Yeah.
like just an immature guy,
Sure.
very physically talented. And I loved like the conversations each and every year. And I was excited for him when he came back. So, like, man, this is a great opportunity for you to kind of mature as a man and as an adult. And so for him to be able to sit in these meetings versus a guy 3 years ago, it will
Right.
be light and day, or night and day, with what he's going to be able to kind of talk to them about and how he'll be able to relate. Um, is the event in your mind, like, is it antiquated? Is it overrated? I mean, do you think that it's done serving its purpose, or is there still a reason to gather, 300 and some odd prospects and all 32 teams together every year for this?
I think it's good. And I think some parts of it certainly don't feel the same as they used to. I like the environment because it's competitive. Like, you'll see which guys are, kind of in the front of the line, got their chest puffed out, and which guys kind of sink to the back. And I think that's a piece of evaluation that's important there. I do think it's important to see what guys are like out of their own element and in a stressful environment. And that's what they try to simulate. And you mentioned the meetings, like you're back to back to back to back meetings with ones that are scheduled. Then they got the little train station where they're just guys all around. They're, sitting you down at the tables and asking you a million different questions. And you have to be on top of your A game. And then even for some of the testing, like, I know people are like, oh, 40 doesn't matter. Yes, it does. Like, I'm not drafting a guy who literally can't run. If it translates to some of the concerns I had on tape, then certainly that's going to be a little bit of a challenge there. The one thing I think is super outdated is the bench press. I never bench pressed anybody on a football field, but the rest of it I'm kind of here for.
Yeah. And the one thing, I've talked to some scouts and front office guys, they go, we like to use the testing to reinforce what we've
Yep.
seen from film. And if a guy's like, hey, this guy looks okay on tape speed wise, and then he runs really fast, like, we always have to open that box of questions up to say, was he a slow processor? Does he just not see things very well? Does he not really love the game? Maybe he just doesn't play that hard. Like, there's a multitude of questions when your numbers don't necessarily line up, or maybe you looked good sometimes, you didn't look good like later in the year, and is that an injury thing, and now you're healthy again? So there are some different reasons and things you can do to put that together. But we'll see how the Buckeyes do with this upcoming NFL draft, as it seems like the NFL, I mean, never stops. They've got the market cornered on continual content that they can just continue to pump out. And one guy in the NFL who did very well in college, and I thought had a pretty good year last year. A lot of questions are surrounding his future with this NFL draft. Well, he plays for the Chicago Bears. We'll talk about him, Mr. Justin Fields, next. Welcome back into the Bobby Carpenter Show. And, Josh, we never played for Coach Tressel. You got recruited by him, but we would have the winner's manual that we'd open up every morning during training camp, during quiet time. And there was all the fundamentals of winners that he had them. And there was different, toughness, courage, commitment. And there would be quotes underneath them. And you read some of these quotes in the morning, reflect on the day, and he'd ask you to share some, maybe the quotes that were most impactful, or maybe a story that was in there that he had kind of assimilated over the course of 25 years. And I feel like this quote might be able to make it in the winner's manual. Just because you don't follow the girl on IG, don't mean you're not messing with them.
Why do you do this?
I'm just throwing it out there. I thought this
I
was
mean,
pretty astute,
the prophet,
comment.
the prophet Justin Fields,
Yes.
letting the people know. I do think we get a little bit too tangled up in the whole who's following who and who unfollowed who. And like the whole, Caleb Downs was embroiled in this kind of thing
Yep.
on social media throughout the week too. And it's like, are we paying attention too much to the social media patterns and the whims of 18 to 25-year-olds, and is that a good thing for us to do in society?
I think it's a terrible thing for us to do in society. I mean, but this is kind of the society we've created, that you get the world that you deserve. And so this is the world that we now deserve and the world that we deserve to live in. It seems like it's trending for him to be out of there. I think we'll know a lot more after Combine Week. And this is why I think the owners like it as much as anything, because you get everybody together and you start having some of those. You're not allowed to talk to anybody until the free agency opens, but Josh, if I've got a player on your team and maybe a player that's not on your team that you might like, and I'm an agent, we could maybe have some of a hypothetical conversation, kind of like the old bump in at the high school for the college
Sure,
coaches, if you will.
sure. Player A, player B. You don't have to use names. We know who everybody's talking about.
So I think that we'll know a lot more about Justin after this, when teams also can kind of feel out the trade market. What would you be willing to give? How good do you feel about him? Um, I, the more I went back and I've watched some of his stuff here 2 weeks ago, and I felt like he had a lot of growth. And so I hope that if he is traded, he's traded to a place that wants to make commitment to him, like, and says, hey, and I say commitment, meaning like, we're going to get you a coordinator. We're going to have a stable
Right,
offense around you and see
right.
what you can do. Understanding that this is like your whatever third system in 4 years or something like that. And that's not conducive to development. But I feel like if he gets in a spot where you can give him somewhat of an offensive line and then some guys that can get open and catch the ball, I think you could be able to see him flourish.
Yeah, I mean, Justin Fields is going to be one of the more interesting careers to follow. You start looking at some of his stats, when he's targeting DJ Moore, for
Yeah.
example, and Cole Kmet, like he's a really good quarterback. A lot of the other guys on that offense don't get open very well or drop the football. And so, it falls on Justin, but it's not all on Justin. I agree with you on the fact of a guy of that skill set. He needs to have the right coordinator in there who is willing to maximize the things that he can do well. And then the last thing that I go back and forth with is like being here in the city of Chicago, I hear all the criticisms of Justin Fields. And one of the things that people said is Justin holds the ball too long and we need a quarterback who's willing to get it out of his hands. Those same people are like, we should draft Caleb Williams. And
Oh,
I'm like,
gosh.
you have not watched a singular
Mhm.
second of college football, and it shows. Because the one thing Caleb Williams does more than anybody I've ever watched is hold the daggone football. He will pass up wide open reads consistently to hold the football, do some wild stuff, and try to make a big play. That is not the guy that you want if you feel like Justin Fields wasn't getting the ball out quick enough. So they have a decision to make here. You never want to be the GM that passes up on the guy who, could have been the next Patrick Mahomes, but at the same time, feels like if you actually invest in Justin, he can be a really good player for you.
I think they could get him that. And yes, you said Caleb Williams, you hit him on the head. I mean, that guy, he's trying to challenge Russell Wilson with who can hold on to the ball longer in certain plays, and it's not great. So either way, you're gonna have to get the guy some protection and figure some things out. We'll see what is next for Justin. All right, we're gonna take a little break here. Get some stuff from the Buckeye Cruise and some of the most obnoxious fan bases in college football. Where do the Buckeyes fall, and who else is at the top? All that coming up here next on the Bobby Carpenter Show. All right, well, welcome back into the Bobby Carpenter Show. And there was a list that was floating around on social media this week about the most annoying, most obnoxious college football fan bases. And I always love to see this because, sometimes when you're at the top of anything, you get the Yankee treatment, the Cowboy treatment, and people are not going to be happy with it because, you're overexposed probably a little bit to most people. But to your fan base, if it's large and people love it, like, you're not overexposed. You're exposed probably just the right amount because people continue to keep watching and everything else is out there. So there's a lot of good stuff. But you had a post that I saw the week before with the biggest brands in college football. And it's amazing, Joshua, how those lists are like a double helix to where Ohio State, biggest brand, but then also most obnoxious. Buckeyes are in the top tier right there with Miami, Georgia, Bama, Michigan, and Texas. And they're all right there in the same biggest brands, most obnoxious. It's basically the same list, just slightly rearranged.
Yeah, it's funny how that goes, right? But I also think that this most obnoxious list in the top tier is pretty accurate. Miami fans, for some reason, just won't shut up and go away until they get good again. So that's unfortunate. Georgia fans, congratulations on the success the last couple of years, but for a team that hadn't won a championship since the 80s, they act like it was nothing but championships all that time. But I'm here for it, though. When you're at the top of the mountain, you get to do what you want to do. Bama fans don't annoy me that much, so maybe this is just because they're successful. Michigan fans, I've got a whole thing about them, and not a lot of it has to do with the football fandom. It's the top public school in the country thing that they always go back to, especially when I go to work at the same places as these people, and it's like, our degrees got us into the same place. Neither here nor there. And then Texas, for a while, it was a lot of that, they hadn't really done anything, and now they're knocking on the door, and they're starting to get a little bit loud too. So I'm here for this.
Well, the Texas in Miami, it was like, is the U back? Is Texas back? Like that's Joshua, you work in sports media. That's the question. It's like, hey, it's August or like late July. Time to insert is the U back? Is Texas back? And every year it's like, look at what they did in the offseason. They won the offseason. And then all of a sudden, maybe start out of the gates quick. But then boom, like all of a sudden 3 losses later, it's like, well, they're 7-3 right now, and they're gonna lose one more and be 8-4. Forget about that national championship hunt. Texas, I got a little bit of grace for them this year because they were back. I mean, they beat Bam, they beat them soundly. So if you're gonna chest thumper, I got no problem as long as you've got something to do it with. And that was the Michigan thing. And I know you're on with Jake Butt, and he's a fellow Central Ohio guy, and like good dude. And you guys go back and forth, and the Scarlet and Blue in your show. But he they hadn't won anything in so long that they tried to change the narrative so that they were a basketball school. You remember that a couple years back? Like, we're more of a basketball school now. Like, did you punt it on your identity and try to completely change it because it didn't fit the narrative anymore?
Oh man, that was one of the funniest heel turns there. And then once they realized that the basketball school thing probably wasn't going to work out for them either, they went full in on academics. They're like, we are Northwestern and Stanford, and the rest of you are going to community college, which I don't think there's anything wrong with that. More people should probably end up doing that, save you a little bit of money. Neither here nor there. But their whole identity thing is strange, and now they're going through this thing too where you just won a championship, a 15-0 season. They played really good football. They lost a ton of players, lost a ton of coaches. They know they're going to take a step back, and they're having trouble reconciling how you could be a championship team and then have one of like the most underwhelming off seasons that we've seen coming off of a championship.
Yeah, like, and some of the ones at the bottom, like Nebraska, Penn State, Iowa, they have LSU in there, which I don't know if I put LSU in that category. I wouldn't say they're annoying, but I wouldn't put them like at the rung of like normal humanity. But I feel like Nebraska, Penn State, and Iowa have just kind of been beaten down to where they are what they are. Like they're in the final stage of grief, Joshua. They've like reached acceptance. They're like where they're at is just kind of where they're at. Iowa's going to go like 9-3 and 10-2. Penn State's going to go 10-2. Nebraska, hey, if we could get to 8-4 or 9-3, we'll be happy again.
I'm telling you right now, I think the one that doesn't belong in that tier is actually Penn State. Nebraska fans are some of the nicest people I've ever met. And to your point, Iowa fans know exactly who they are. They know that there might be a 7-5, an 8-4 in there, but they're also going to have a 10-2 or an 11-1, and they're going to enjoy every one of those seasons. Penn State fans do this thing around August, where they start to look and say, well, is it our year to take the Big Ten? And it's hard for me, but no, it's not. Like, I'm sorry, you're a very good team. It's not to say that you're not competitive and you gotten close, but no, it's just like you can't find that top gear, and it's tough to find, but let's not have this conversation right now.
All right. speaking of obnoxious fan bases, Ohio State, as we said, was up there, but we also had the Buckeye Cruise for Cancer, something that kind of blends the best parts of Ohio State. Like it brings in alumni, people that just love the Buckeyes, people that have had cancer, the James Cancer Hospital, like blends that all with on one boat, put it with athletics, and it's awesome. And so, you've gone on that before. I've gone Ryan Miller, like Keith Byers, you start Eddie George, you start looking at like the names, and it's really kind of blended everybody together. And all the fans absolutely love it. Raised $4.4 million this year. I think they're getting close to 40 million now over
Mm.
17 years. And so your fondest memories of being involved with that, and hopefully we'll get you back on it again after the birth of your child, but just what all that means. And so as we talk about being obnoxious, there's also the positive side, obviously that camaraderie.
Yeah, and I've mentioned this before. I think one of the coolest things is how you've got different eras of Buckeyes on there that get to bond. And like I've met people that I saw as heroes, and you get to meet them in person. People always say, you don't want to meet your heroes, and it's like, no, this is an opportunity where you absolutely want to meet your heroes because they're all great people. The ability to do the outreach as well and to connect with people that have had true hardship and adversity in their life. And in sports, we talk about adversity and like, yes, it's tough, but not the battles that some of these people have fought. And that's awesome. But you mentioned the numbers, the $4.4 million, and you see some of the chunks of giving that happen on this boat. And it's breathtaking every time you see somebody volunteer $250,000 in one evening. It's like, oh my goodness, it's amazing.
And what's also awesome is now they're with the NIL situation, we're on current players. Last year, Cade, Tommy, Steele, and Emeka came. This year, Emeka was back. JT, Jack, Donovan Jackson, Denzel, um, Cody Simon. Oh goodness, I don't want to miss anybody. I know there's one more guy that's gonna. Oh, and Travion all came. Ryan Day was there, as well as Jim Tressel. And so I think they were kind of blown away when they see this, and you're like, this is what Ohio State is. And usually you don't realize it till after you're gone.
Yep.
They got a little taste of it while
The
they were
young
still.
guys are living different nowadays,
They
man.
are, coach. But they were a great reflection. You would have
Oh,
been
sure.
incredibly proud of the young men that are being raised by these parents, and then
No doubt.
ultimately coming through the Ohio State University. So, with that, we're going to get to our questions that you always pose. The tailgate talk with Josh and I. We're going to answer some of your questions here coming up next on the Bobby Carpenter Show. Welcome back in to the Bobby Carpenter Show. We got the tailgate talk. Your questions answered by us, former Buckeyes, Joshua Perry, and myself. And we got a good one here. First question coming from Scott Stender. Is Brandon Jordan coming in as a bridge to the next D-line coach when referencing Larry Johnson, hangs it up, parentheses, if ever, or setting up, the eventual transition? And Larry's been there since 13, I want to say
13.
14, 13.
It
So you
was
gotta think he's
13.
been in Ohio State for over a decade. A guy that was at Penn State for so long and tied there. Now has been Ohio State for a really long time. I think he's in his 70s, upper 60s, maybe low 70s. He's
Yeah.
been at it for a while. His boys are older than me, and my dad's going to be 69 this year, so he's got to be somewhere in that range. But it seems like this could be a nice transition process. We bring in Jordan, as kind of an off the field pass rush guy, working with
Right.
guys a little bit, and maybe that makes it a little bit smoother and more seamless, especially when you're recruiting, if people are familiar with what it's going to look like.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard he's got juice when guys get on campus to recruit. And when he was at Michigan State, I actually had a chance to meet him. And one of the things that he did that brought a lot of value to them was during the summer, he would host a pass rush summit. So you would have some of the best rushers from the NFL that would be on campus, and the players would be able to watch what was going on there. And that brought a lot of cachet. And Michigan State actually used him as one of their full-time on-field coaches, but he wasn't necessarily like a scheme guy. He was the pass rush plan. Like he would come up with the plan for each of the players
Yeah.
based off of what they were going to see and have them implemented throughout the week. So from a scheme standpoint, I think there's probably going to be a little bit of a learning curve that he's going to have to go through if he's going to be the transitional plan. But From everything that I've heard, he's got juice out there on the trail. Ohio State, I think, is a little bit of a different beast in terms of expectations and legacies and what is, expected to be developed of the guys. But ultimately, I don't think it's a bad thing to have somebody whose sole job is to teach guys how to get after the quarterback. Having that guy around is important.
It is, and it's pretty darn impressive. I like that. And like you said, he has experience. Maybe in this year, can I also help him gain some of that knowledge from a guy in Larry Johnson who's been coaching high level college football for 30 years and getting it all done that way. And so we talked a little bit. James Laurinaitis was named the 10th assistant coach. He'll be taking over the linebackers and running that room more so than just as a graduate assistant, which he basically did last year, but now he's able to get on the road recruiting and being able to do some other stuff and, do have the full scope of being a head full-time position coach. And so with that, like how much improvement can we expect from Laurinaitis with the LB group? And as a side note, the guy says, I hope he stays there for as long as he wants.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's going to have an interesting task here. And we've heard about, does Sonny move to linebacker? Does he not? I don't have any insight. I don't know if you do. But Cody, I thought he played well.
I think they're working. I think that's the plan. Like things
like
can
it.
always change, as you know, in spring ball. But I think ideally they would like to see Sonny Styles playing linebacker.
Well, I mean, they're loaded in the back end, so it makes a lot of sense. And I think Sonny, with his size, they could actually allow him to pack on a couple more pounds if he's playing closer to the line of scrimmage. I definitely like that. But that's a development job. And I think the one that everybody's looking at is CJ Hicks. And if he can be a guy who is ready to play for whatever his opportunities may look like. The one thing I do know about James, and we've talked about him on this show before, is super sharp dude, but he is a real connector. Like he is great with people. And I think you learn better as a player when you have somebody who you feel like you connect with.
Absolutely. I think you're 100% on that, Joshua. Great point with it. James, he is a Buckeye. He's been here. He's played here. He was developed. He wasn't some high flying 5-star that came in. He's 3-star kid out of Wazetta who, ends up starting, as a sophomore and winning a litany of awards. So
Yeah.
I don't think you could have a guy, and he talked about the recruiting. He's like, I don't have to sell anything. I just tell you about my experiences and hey, what it did for me. It gave me, helped me, to become a great player, catapulted my life. I got a great degree. I met my wife here, like all these different things, like bam, bam, bam. That sounds really good. Also, another question, and we'll probably talk more about this, Joshua, in the coming weeks, because the new NCAA football game's coming out. And we talked about, for them doing that now, guys will be getting compensated. And so you have to opt in because there is no, and this is part of the problem with how college football is set up, there is no governing body like there is in the NFL with the NFL Players Association. So they negotiate all the contracts and collectively the players, you get a check every year and it's the video games, you get a percentage of jersey sales, all this stuff. And then when you do stuff independently, they pay you on your own, but they negotiate a piece for all, basically 1,600 players. Well, there's a lot more players in college football. And there's a lot more teams, a lot more schools with that. You start talking about 130 times roughly 85. And then the question came from Corey, who used to actually live in Columbus, has moved away now. But he said, if you played today, would you take the $600 and a copy of the NCAA football game to actually be in the game? I think is that enough, or would you be holding out for more, trying to withhold your services?
I take it in a heartbeat. Are you kidding me? So let's just run through some of the numbers here. You mentioned it. There are going to be actually 134 teams in this game, 85 guys, and they're not necessarily all the scholarship guys either. Just because you opt in doesn't mean that they're going to use your name, image, and likeness. A detail that a lot of people don't know. Comes out to about 11,000 players. Now, when I first heard about the $600 thing, I said 99+% of the players should be fine with the $600. They should take it. And the EA Sports already said that they're going to set aside, 100 players that are going to be ambassadors for the game. So that works out to about 99% of the players getting the $600. Totally here for that. NCAA probably going to be popular in its first year back, but it's not going to do Madden numbers consistently. There are far less players in the NFL. They're selling more copies. That's how you get to more money there, just for people that are considering the finances. But I was a guy who led the team in tackles on a national championship team. And I can say with confidence that there is nobody out there who would have been playing the game for Joshua Perry except for a few dudes that I went to high school with. That is it. And so if I could get $600 in my pocket, I'm good. I feel like this world has been clouded a little bit because you have collectives that are saying they're doing NIL deals with people, and they're not really NIL deals. Like, it's not a deal with a company for services. They're getting guys on campus and they're taking care of them, which I don't have a problem with. But when you actually start talking about businesses and budgets and value that's created, this is how you get to this point of $600.
Yeah, the value add. And like, hey, if you're really good and let's say, Caleb Williams elected to come back, hey, we'll give you $500,000 to be on the cover of the game. Or maybe they even do it like some of the sports magazines where they have regional covers of guys for different
Right.
things. So there's a lot of different options. And yeah, those guys will get more, just like whoever's on the cover of Madden gets their own negotiated chunk as opposed to just the allotment with it. And so hopefully they can figure this out. And it would be nice if the players could have some sort, it doesn't have to be a union, like a workers organization or something like that, where they could have somebody that could kind of figure this out. The $600 too low. It might be a little low if the game starts to grow in popularity. Maybe in 2 years, Joshua, they're getting $1,000. But I think this is a good start. I think everybody should be pretty happy about it because, like you said, for the majority of players, it's a heck of a deal. So with that, we'll wrap up the show. The Buckeyes are going to be playing up in the Windy City. But will it be at Ryan Field or will it be at someplace way more historic? Talk about that next on the Bobby Carpenter Show. All right, final segment here of the program. If you've been watching on YouTube, please make sure you like, subscribe, leave some comments for us. Anywhere else on social media, if you're watching on Bally's too, thank you very much. We greatly appreciate it. And hopefully we're entertaining and providing you a little bit of information. New information that found out just a couple of days ago. Buckeyes playing at Northwestern on November 16th. But they're going to be building a new stadium. Joshua, Ryan Field will probably be renamed Ryan Field, but in a bigger and larger capacity. I think the Ryan's got the biggest checkbook for athletics at Northwestern. So if you're going to tear mine down, well, you know what? We'll give you another $500 million or whatever it is to build the new one. Seems pretty cool that it could be reportedly played at Wrigley, Soldier Field, some of these games at Lambeau. Ohio State is rumored to be at Wrigley Field. It'll be a unique playing situation. I think it's a pretty cool experience.
Yeah, I think it's going to get old for Northwestern, certainly. I think for the visiting teams, it's going to be a really good experience. They played Iowa at Wrigley last year. I was supposed to be on the call for that game, but we had some plans change there. Certainly some challenges there fitting the field in, a baseball stadium is not ideal. And, there's some sharing of the sidelines that typically has to go on there. One year they played it and they had to go the same direction the whole game
because they only
because
have
of the dimensions.
Well, I think they had one end zone. They only had 110 yards, so you always had to go like to the right.
So it's interesting. I think people are going to enjoy it on the way in. Like I said, if you're a Northwestern fan and they haven't been showing up for a lot of things as of late for football anyway, it's probably going to get a little bit tired there. Better there probably than Soldier just because of where the campus is located. Stay on the north side. Soldier is hard to get in and out of on game days. The field there is already terrible, and I know the NFL is a little bit iffy, but Lambeau probably out of all three options might play Wisconsin. That'd be the coolest one.
Yeah, I think that would be pretty cool. Lambeau, obviously that. But for Wrigley, like you said, for a visiting team, for a one-off to go in there, like that's a game. We were talking about that on the Buckeye Cruise. The amount of people are like, you know what? I'll go up to Chicago to watch that. Like, let's get a road trip. Like, go to Chicago, watch the Buckeyes play in Wrigley. Probably 90%, 95, coming away with a win. So you feel good. It checks all the boxes. And where else are you going to watch a game in Wrigley in November, especially that of the football variety? So very excited. But for Northwestern, like you said, that would be terrible having to play all your home games there. So thank you for tuning in. Thanks, Josh, for being with us. Make sure you tune in next week to the newest edition of the Bobby Carpenter Show right here on the Big Play Network.